Be just and fear not. That's the message featured prominently outside a church in the opening sequence of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and it's a message I want you to keep in mind for the next 20 minutes or so. I believe it is a worthy sentiment, and one that I take to heart in my day-to-day life. Regular viewers of this channel know that I tend to avoid partisan politics, but some movies are so in-your-face about their socio-political messages that to not have a discussion on their politics would be unfair. This is one such movie, where behind the veneer of abject ridiculousness and a celebration of classic sci-fi cinema, there is a discussion about cultural change and an invitation to tolerance, an invitation to be just and fear not. That's what I've always taken away from it anyway, alongside a realization that, despite being secure in my own heterosexuality, I'll always see Tim Curry as one sexy, sexy man.
They would have you murdered. All you'll ever be.
I would like to take you on a strange journey.
Brad and Janet are a young couple who have just agreed to get married. However, one rainy night, their car breaks down, forcing them to seek shelter in a nearby castle, where they meet the strange Dr. Frank N. Furter. The Doctor shows the couple a world unlike anything they'd ever imagined, full of sex, rock and roll, and macabre experiments involving the creation of man. Can Brad and Janet escape the Doctor's clutches, or will they be forever transformed into something not of this earth? The sword of demonetization is hanging over my head, and I've got the feeling someone's gonna be cutting the thread. YouTube, you see, is more prudish than network television from the 1950s. No, seriously, I'm not exaggerating. I once got a video age restricted specifically because of a 50s TV commercial. Earning more than a pittance from this platform is difficult enough without having to worry about that nonsense, so if you'd like to support what I'm doing, of course like and subscribe, but also consider becoming a channel member or supporting me on Patreon to get access to bonus content, vote on future topics like this one, and more. I want to give a sincere thanks to my top tier patrons: Batty Bat Firebrand, Chuck Poor, Diane McGill Davis, Giffen Chumley, Mike O'Connor, John Burrell, Numinous 2019, Robert McGill, Scott Johnner, Sean Vale, Spotes, TB Shremick, and Warren Davis. None of this would be possible without you. Now then, let's taunt the algorithm by talking about alien transvestites from transsexual Transylvania. The British-born New Zealander Richard O'Brien was a fledgling out-of-work actor in the early 1970s. He'd been in a run of the musical Hair and had played small roles in other theater productions such as Jesus Christ Superstar and The Unseen Hand, all under the direction of James Sharman. It was to Sharman that O'Brien presented his own idea for a show, a musical mashup of various songs he penned over the years that were inspired by classic science fiction, Steve Reeves movies, 50s rock and roll culture, and British glam. Sharman was up for making it happen, and after its small London premiere in June of 1973 under the title The Rocky Horror Show, the musical proved to be a smash hit with critics and audiences. More performances quickly popped up around the world in LA, Sydney, Copenhagen, Madrid, and Broadway. The film rights belonged to Lou Adler, co-owner of the Roxy Theatre in West Hollywood, who had purchased them after seeing one of its earliest London performances. Though primarily a music producer who had helped launch the careers of the Mamas and the Papas, Carole King, and many more, Adler did dabble in movie production, or at least executive producing. So he, along with British theatre producer Michael White, who helped produce the stage play and had himself started dipping his toes into film production with Monty Python and the Holy Grail, decided to bring the Rocky Horror Show to the big screen. 20th Century Fox, still reeling from a major management shakeup following the forced removal of Richard Zanuck, agreed to distribute the film and even offered to help produce it with a much higher budget if all of the principal cast members could be replaced with bankable movie stars and musical talent. However, Jim Sharman, who was already locked in as the film's director, balked at the idea, only ceding to the hiring of 3 Americans, but refusing to recast some of the most important roles. Thus, on a reduced budget somewhere in the ballpark of $1.2 million, the Rocky Horror Picture Show went into production in late 1974. Like I just said, most of the principal cast was retained from the London stage version, starting with Tim Curry as Dr. Frank N. Furter. Curry hadn't been in a feature film before, and he got the part after meeting O'Brien during the production of Hair. A chance meeting at the gym as the Rocky Horror Show was getting ready to launch led to Curry reading the script, loving it, and subsequently beating out Jonathan Kramer for the part. Fox wanted a bona fide rock star in the role, and Mick Jagger reportedly was eager to do it, but again, Sharman held firm and cast Tim Curry, giving him the breakout performance that would make him a household name to this day. Other returning cast members are Richard O'Brien himself, who plays the Igor-inspired riffraff,
Hello.
and Patricia Quinn, who plays Riffraff's sister, Magenta. In the stage version, Quinn sang the opening and closing song, science fiction double feature, and almost quit the project altogether when they informed her she couldn't sing it for the film. Instead, the voice you hear is actually O'Brien's, but perhaps as consolation for the snub, the famous lips you see are still Quinn's. While we're on the subject, a quick digression about that opening track. It references a lot of sci-fi classics, most of which I've already covered on this channel, and I want to break it down for you, in order. There's The Day the Earth Stood Still, Flash Gordon, The Invisible Man, King Kong, It Came from Outer Space, Dr. X, Forbidden Planet, Tarantula, The Day of the Triffids, Curse of the Demon, and When Worlds Collide. And now I've got the song stuck in my head again. One other reference from the song Rose Tint My World that I had to look up was Lily St. Cyr, a burlesque stripper from the 40s and 50s who may have inspired Marilyn Monroe. Anyway, getting back to the cast. The Australian singer Nell Campbell, aka Little Nell, reprises her role as Columbia, while Jonathan Adams, who had originally played the criminologist narrator, takes over the role of Dr. Scott. In the original play and many of its subsequent performances, both Dr. Scott and his nephew Eddie are played by the same person, though for the film the two roles are separated, with the American rocker Michael Lee Addy, aka Meatloaf, playing Eddie. Coincidentally, Meatloaf had been in an LA run of Hair, which got him the part of Eddie/Dr. Scott in the LA run of the Rocky Horror Show. The two parts recast for Fox were the nominal leads, Brad and Janet. Brad is played by Barry Bostwick, a pop singer who had earned a Tony nomination for Grease and had done the English language dub for the main character of Terre in La Planète Sauvage. Though Rocky Horror didn't rocket him to stardom, he has had steady work on stage and television ever since. Janet, on the other hand, is played by Susan Sarandon, who had done a little work in film and television, but who had yet to really break out to become the world-famous acting icon she is today. Sarandon was hesitant to take the part of Janet because she didn't think she was a very good singer, and after the film became a hit, she didn't like to talk about it much for a couple of reasons. One was that her experience wasn't that great, since she caught pneumonia while filming the grueling floor show scenes, and another was because the cast wasn't paid any residuals when the movie went to home video. Contrary to popular belief, she isn't actually ashamed of the movie.
It's funny because journalists very often assume that somehow I'm ashamed of being part of it. And I'm not.
Other actors worth mentioning are strongman Peter Hinwood as the titular Rocky, with his vocals dubbed over by Trevor White, and Blofeld himself, Charles Gray, as the criminologist, whose scenes were filmed in one day. There are also several cameos, including O'Brien's then-wife Kimmy Wong, future Love It or List It co-host Hilary Farr, and British character actor Christopher Biggins, who would go on to play the criminologist in a few showings of the Rocky Horror Show in 2010. Much to the chagrin of new Fox head of production Alan Ladd Jr., who wanted to cancel the project, the Rocky Horror Picture Show began filming in late October of 1974, primarily at Bray Studios near Berkshire. Frankenfurter's castle is Oakley Court, a staple of Hammer Productions that was, at the time, falling into disrepair. It would later become a hotel. There were some challenges with filming in only 6 weeks, including Sarandon's aforementioned pneumonia and a couple of minor injuries to both Meatloaf and his stunt double during this complicated sequence. If you watch carefully, you can also see Barry Bostwick accidentally slam his fist down on Susan Sarandon's hand and see her authentic reaction.
What exactly are you implying? It's all right!
The costumes were designed by Sue Blaine, who by her own admission had never seen a science fiction film and did no research for the project. However, many of her creations, such as the torn fishnet stockings, are often credited as founding inspirations for punk fashion a few years later. Though the budget for the costumes on the film was higher than for the stage show, they did have to be doubled up, especially the ones for the floor show, where, when they were supposed to be wet, one would be used for shooting while the other was being dried. Meanwhile, Pierre LaRoche, the makeup artist behind the signature glam of Mick Jagger and David Bowie, was brought in to do the makeup. On stage, the actors were largely responsible for their own, but for the film, LaRoche designed the look for each of the characters. Still, due to time constraints, many of the actors, including Curry, still had to apply their own makeup after being shown how. The sets were designed by Brian Thompson, another holdover from the London stage. One unique challenge he faced was a problem of his own making. He had neglected to build a door for the large pink room where Rocky is born. Therefore, when the script called for Dr. Scott to be drawn into the room by an electromagnet, they decided to have him crash through the wall.
Great Scott!
One of my favorite anecdotes about the principal photography comes from Richard O'Brien and Patricia Quinn's audio commentary, where they describe a stuntman who was brought in for a single day to film Rocky and Frank's King Kong-esque climb up the RKO Tower. He had no idea what kind of movie he was walking into, and when he was handed his costume, he was surprised, and spent most of the day off camera, strutting around in an exaggeratingly masculine manner. The Rocky Horror Picture Show released in the UK in mid-August 1975, and in America at the end of September. The two versions are slightly different, most notably in the UK's inclusion of a longer version of superheroes at the end. Initially, critics and audiences didn't take to the movie outside of LA, and it seemed destined to flop. In the US, they made a new poster inspired by Man Ray's Lips Over Hollywood, and spoofing the iconic poster for Jaws, this one featuring the lips of model Lorelei Shark. This did little to improve the movie's prospects, until producer Lou Adler and Fox's VP for marketing, Tim Deegan, saw the potential for midnight showings, given the success of John Waters' cult hit Pink Flamingos. Starting on April Fool's Day 1976, the Rocky Horror Picture Show became a midnight movie staple, especially at New York's Waverly Theater, where the phenomenon of audience participation and shadow performers began. From there, it became a certified cult hit, only growing in popularity until, by the close of the decade, sold-out crowds were throwing hot dogs at movie screens at 1 o'clock in the morning. Though it has waxed and waned in popularity, it has never gone out of circulation, surviving the death of disco, Reaganomics, the Clinton impeachment, 9/11, Nickelback, Disney's purchase of Fox, the COVID pandemic, and whatever new apocalypse happens between my recording this audio and it being published. In fact, The Rocky Horror Picture Show holds the record for longest consecutively running theatrical release in cinema history. All told, it has earned in excess of $113 million over the last 49 years. I first encountered this movie when I was a teenager. Being the youngest child has its perks, and no joke, I went to my first midnight showing when I was only 15. What can I say? I was precocious. I've seen the movie dozens if not hundreds of times by now, have memorized all the songs, and am completely incapable of reviewing it in an objective or unbiased way. Not that I believe a truly objective or unbiased review of anything can even exist. I think the Rocky Horror Picture Show resonates with younger audiences because it represents a joyful embrace of liberation, of sexual freedom without the maturity we're told we need. While it is a seminal work that has been embraced by the LGBT community ever since Tim Curry first burst out of that robe, it's probably too reductive to simply look at it through such a lens. Instead, I think the movie is more broadly about shedding puritanical traditionalism and being confronted with extremes that show us who we really are. It's no coincidence it came out of the 1970s, and lest you think it is outwardly hostile to the conservative mores of the time, it also celebrates classic Hollywood sci-fi in a playful way that doesn't feel mean-spirited. It is absolutely a call for hedonism in response to cultural repression, but it does, in its own silly way, show the dark side of such sinful celebration. Frank is a symbol of unchecked indulgence, but he is also a villain at the end of the day, an alien who holds life cheap and pays the price for it. He is also a symbol of the excesses a lot of people encounter as they enter adulthood. Brad and Janet are about to get married, but first, they must be tested in a crucible that dares to ask them what they really want, deep down underneath their societal programming. I like to think the pair still get married and have their happy ending, and that they are all the better for their experiences in Frankenfurter's castle. You also have to remember that this movie came out of the camp and glam movements, counterculture responses to the somber gray realism that permeated most of the art scene at the time. It's intended to not be taken too seriously, which I'm obviously failing at right now, and it's intended to push the boundaries of good taste. We always need that, to keep us from getting too comfortable in that stuffy, British, stiff upper lip kind of mentality. Yes, it's stupid. Yes, it's adolescent. Yes, it's puerile. And yes, it is obviously a sci-fi classic. And that's all for today, my fellow Earthlings. Which song is better, science fiction double feature or the time warp? Let me know in the comments, and while you're down there, don't forget to give those like and subscribe buttons a ping. Thank you for watching, and until next time when we'll talk about the brain-computer interface and the military-industrial complex, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love, as long as you're not hurting anyone.